And at number 10, we unravel the story of a young man whose web of lies and fake identities collapsed under the weight of his own monstrous deception. Stay tuned, because the true ringleaders were not just a single disturbed son, but a calculated shared delusion operating in the shadows of a quiet Wisconsin neighborhood. Number 10. Chandler Halderson, The Anatomy of a Lie. The date: reported missing, remains found, July 2021. The victims: Bart and Krista Halderson. The crime: murder, dismemberment, and disposal of parents while fabricating an elaborate life of lies. The Halderson family seemed utterly conventional. Bart and Krista were supportive parents, proud of their 23-year-old son, Chandler Halderson. Chandler lived at home in the quiet village of Windsor, Wisconsin, and was, by all outward appearances, succeeding brilliantly. He told everyone he was a successful student at a local technical college and was interviewing for high-level jobs at major corporations like SpaceX. His life was moving forward. But beneath the surface of this picture-perfect narrative was a profound, rotting truth. Chandler Halderson was a compulsive liar. He wasn't enrolled in college, he didn't have a job at SpaceX. His entire life was a fabricated shell, supported by years of casual but massive deceptions he fed his unsuspecting parents. The pressure of maintaining this facade reached a breaking point in the summer of 2021. Bart Halderson, Chandler's father, was a practical man. He was becoming increasingly skeptical of his son's elaborate claims and was pressing him for details about his supposed job and college enrollment. The truth was about to be exposed, and for Chandler, exposure was a fate worse than any crime. On the night of July 1, 2021, the confrontation finally occurred at the family home. What exactly happened is known only to Chandler, but the result was catastrophic. Chandler murdered both his 50-year-old father, Bart, and his 53-year-old mother, Krista. The cover-up that followed was cold, detailed, and utterly chilling. On July 7th, Chandler filed a missing person report, claiming his parents had suddenly left town to go to their cabin. He launched an aggressive, highly public plea for their safe return, conducting emotional media interviews and engaging on social media, a performance of profound grief designed to divert suspicion. But his narrative began to fray almost immediately. Investigators quickly noted the inconsistencies in his story and the sheer, almost theatrical nature of his distress. The physical evidence was discovered through painstaking police work. On July 8th, just one day after the missing persons report, a torso believed to be Bart Halderson was found on property near the Wisconsin River. 6 days later, on July 14th, Krista Halderson's dismembered remains were found on family property in the rural town of Cottage Grove. The discovery painted a gruesome picture. Chandler hadn't just murdered his parents, he had taken the horrifying step of dismembering their bodies and scattering the remains in an attempt to destroy all evidence. The motive was clear: to permanently silence his parents before they could expose his lifetime of lies, a disclosure that would have meant the end of his comfortable life. The trial was dominated by the chilling display of his deception, the fake emails, the fabricated job offers, the detailed tapestry of lies he had woven around himself. Chandler Halderson was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide and was later sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The true tragedy of the Halderson case is the insight it provides into the corrosive power of deceit. The parricide wasn't committed in a fit of rage, it was a desperate, calculated maneuver to protect a fantasy life. The ultimate act of betrayal was not the murder itself, but the years of lies that led up to it. Chandler Halderson's cold calculation shocked the American legal system. But imagine a case driven not by a need to cover a lie, but by the hunger for wealth. A plot hatched by a high society daughter in Brazil that involved her boyfriend and a friend. And what was the horrifying moment that turned the plot into a brutal reality? That answer, which involves an axe and a shocking socialite betrayal, awaits us later in this countdown. But first, if you find this dive into the calculus of crime and betrayal compelling, take a moment to subscribe and comment below which of these 10 plots you find the most shocking. Number 9. Suzane von Richthofen, The Socialite Plot. The date: 31 October 2002. The victims: Manfred and Maritzia von Richthofen. The crime: planning and facilitating the murder of their parents for inheritance. The von Richthofen name in São Paulo, Brazil, represented the pinnacle of upper-class society. Manfred von Richthofen was a wealthy German engineer, and Maritzia a respected psychiatrist. Their 18-year-old daughter, Suzane von Richthofen, lived a privileged life, surrounded by wealth, comfort, and expectation. But like many stories of parricide, the exterior was a magnificent lie. Suzane had developed a consuming relationship with Daniel Cravinhos, a mechanic from a significantly lower social class. Suzane's parents vehemently disapproved of the relationship, seeing Daniel as unsuitable and a threat to their daughter's future. They cut her allowance and made it clear that the relationship must end. To Suzane, her parents were not protectors, they were obstacles, standing between her and the life she wanted, a life free of their control and financed by their substantial estate. The solution in her mind was simple: remove the obstacles and inherit the fortune. Suzane, Daniel Cravinhos, and Daniel's brother Christian began meticulously planning the murder. The plot was simple and designed to look like a robbery gone wrong. On the night of October 31, 2002, the plan was put into action. Suzane spent the day with Daniel and Christian, then returned home alone. She waited until her parents were asleep and then disabled the alarm system and opened the door for the two brothers. While Suzane waited downstairs, Daniel and Christian crept into the master bedroom. They bludgeoned the sleeping couple to death with an axe and a steel bar. To stage the scene, they ransacked the room, spreading documents and valuables around to simulate a break-in. Then they fled the house, taking the stolen valuables and rejoining Suzane. The immediate aftermath involved a chilling performance. Suzane, along with the Cravinhos brothers, went to a nearby motel. When they returned hours later, Suzane acted the part of the horrified victim, discovering her murdered parents and immediately calling the police. The investigation, however, quickly unraveled her performance. Police noted that Suzane was oddly calm and had cleaned up a bloodstain near the scene with unusual thoroughness. The couple's missing wealth was later recovered at the home of the Cravinhos brothers. The timeline simply didn't add up. Under intense questioning, Christian Cravinhos eventually confessed, outlining the entire plot, confirming Suzane's role as the mastermind and accomplice. The motive was clear: money and perceived freedom. Suzane stood to inherit an estate valued at millions of US dollars. The trial became a massive media event in Brazil, a scandal that exposed the rot at the heart of high society. Suzane was convicted of homicidio qualificado, or qualified homicide, and sentenced to 39 years and 6 months in prison in 2006. The Cravinhos brothers received similar sentences. The Suzane von Richthofen case is a devastating study in psychopathy and entitlement. She viewed her parents not as human beings, but as financial obstacles to be eliminated. The betrayal was complete, exchanging a life of comfort for a cell, all for the promise of a freedom she would never truly attain. Suzane von Richthofen's crime was motivated by cold financial calculation. But the next case is marked by a deep-seated, dark family history. We shift continents to Hong Kong, where a middle-aged son's failure to launch led to one of the most macabre and sensational parricide cases in history. What terrifying, unbelievable detail did the police discover about the remains of the elderly couple? Next, we journey into the deeply disturbing story of
Number 8. Henry Chau Hoi-leung, The Hong Kong Horror. The date, March 2013. Bodies discovered. The victims, Chau Wing-ki and Xiao Yuet-yi, Henry's elderly parents. The crime? Murder, dismemberment, and macabre concealment of his elderly parents. The life of Henry Chau Hoi-leung was one of sustained disappointment and bitterness. In his late 20s, Henry was living with his elderly parents in a small flat in Hong Kong, a common situation in the high-cost city, but one that bred severe resentment in Henry. He felt emasculated, a failure to launch, and blamed his parents for his lack of success. Henry and his parents, Chau Wing-ki and Xiao Yuet-yi, were last seen in March 2013. Shortly after, Henry began telling friends and relatives an elaborate story. His parents had left for the mainland to travel or live elsewhere. He maintained this facade for weeks. But unlike many parricide cases, Henry had an accomplice, his friend Matthew Day. The two men had developed a nihilistic worldview, centered around a belief that Henry needed to be freed from his family to truly live. The plot was hatched: kill the parents, conceal the bodies, and claim they had moved away. The reality of the murder, as it was later revealed, was horrifying. The parents were lured to a flat Henry had rented in the Tai Kok Tsui district of Hong Kong. It was there they were murdered. The method was quick and brutal, involving the use of a knife and a meticulous, gruesome cleanup operation that lasted for days. The cover-up involved extreme dismemberment and concealment. When the police eventually closed in, they located the rented flat, and the scene defied belief. In the small, cramped flat, investigators discovered 2 freezers. Inside, they found the dismembered remains of Chau Wing-ki and Xiao Yuet-yi. The bodies were separated into dozens of pieces, stored in plastic containers. The macabre staging, the sheer audacity of keeping the bodies in the flat, stunned the veteran investigators. During the subsequent investigation and trial, Henry Chau offered a chilling defense. He attempted to argue diminished responsibility, claiming he suffered from mental issues and that his friend, Matthew Day, was the dominant figure. But the evidence pointed to a calculated, shared act of profound malice. The motive was multifaceted: resentment, a strange belief that by killing them he would achieve immortality, and the immediate, practical goal of taking possession of the family assets, however modest. The trial in 2015 was sensational. A key, horrifying detail that emerged was the claim made by one of the accomplices that some parts of the parents' remains were allegedly cooked as part of the concealment process. While the forensic evidence on this specific claim was contested, the totality of the crime left the jury horrified. Henry Chau Hoi-leung was convicted of the double murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. His accomplice, Matthew Day, received a lesser sentence for his role in the disposal and cover-up. The Henry Chau case serves as a dark testament to the explosive nature of family resentment and the terrible lengths some will go to escape the perceived burden of obligation and failure. The sheer meticulousness of the dismemberment remains one of the darkest aspects of Hong Kong's criminal history. The cold, dark planning of Henry Chau was almost impossible to comprehend, yet it was ultimately exposed. But what happens when the killer is not an adult trying to escape obligation, but a teenage boy who simply wants to throw a party? Next, we move back to the United States to a shocking case where a teenage boy murdered his parents just so he could invite over dozens of friends for a night of oblivious celebration. But what was the one tell that gave the killer away to his friends? Number 7. Tyler Hadley, The Party, and the Parricide. The date, 16 July 2011. The victims, Blake and Mary Jo Hadley. The crime? Murdering his parents and hosting a house party while their bodies lay hidden in a master bedroom. Tyler was a troubled 17-year-old living in Port St. Lucie, Florida. He had a history of substance abuse, behavioral problems, and was constantly clashing with his parents, Blake and Mary Jo Hadley, about his future and his destructive habits. On Saturday, July 16, 2011, Tyler was told he could not throw a party. This simple denial, a typical parental restriction, was, for Tyler, the final straw. It was an obstacle to his immediate, selfish desire to be popular and have fun. That afternoon, while his father, Blake, was relaxing on the couch, Tyler snuck up behind him and bludgeoned him repeatedly with a 22-inch claw hammer. His mother, Mary Jo, was in the kitchen. When she heard the commotion, she ran in and was also brutally attacked with the hammer until she collapsed. Both parents were dead. The violence was impulsive, frenzied, and devastating. But what happened next was the single most shocking act of the entire crime. Tyler was determined to have his party. He dragged his parents' bodies into the master bedroom, covered them with towels and personal items, and locked the door. He then quickly cleaned up the bloodstains and discarded the hammer. By 9 p.m., dozens of people began arriving at the Hadley house. Tyler, seemingly calm and exuberant, played the host. He served alcohol, smoked with his friends, and acted as if everything was completely normal. The party was loud and rowdy and went on for hours, with music blaring and teens oblivious to the horror just down the hall. The party was a success in one sense. It was loud and large, but Tyler made a fundamental mistake. He confided in one friend, Matthew Menendez. As the party was winding down in the early morning hours of Sunday morning, Tyler pulled Menendez aside and whispered the unbelievable truth. He led Menendez to the locked master bedroom door, pointed to it and said, "That's where they are." Menendez, initially skeptical, pressed Tyler until the killer admitted, "I hit them with a hammer." Tyler then allowed Menendez a glimpse inside the room, revealing the horrifying bloody scene. Menendez was, understandably, terrified. He immediately called a friend who called the police. When the police arrived shortly after 4 a.m., they found Tyler calmly talking to Menendez on the front lawn. After a brief search, the officers located the bodies and the claw hammer used in the crime. Tyler Hadley was arrested. In his confession, he claimed to have killed his parents because he was tired of them always being on his back and that he wanted to throw a big party. The simplicity of the motive was as disturbing as the crime itself. Hadley killed his parents to throw a party, a horrifying act of selfishness. Yet a few years earlier, another child committed parricide for a different reason entirely: to protect himself and his family from a monster in their own home. Next, we journey to California, where a 10-year-old boy made a terrible, final decision to shoot his neo-Nazi father. But what was the one piece of evidence that defined the father's hatred and sealed the boy's fate?
Number 6. Joseph Hall, The Takedown of the Tyrant. The date, 1/1/2011. The victim, Jeffrey Hall, Joseph's father. The crime, a 10-year-old boy shot his abusive neo-Nazi father. The Hall family home in Riverside, California, was not a sanctuary. It was a compound of abuse, fear, and hate. Jeffrey Hall was a known figure in the white supremacist movement, a regional leader of the National Socialist movement. He was not just a racist, he was a violent, tyrannical father who verbally and physically abused his children, his partner, and especially his 10-year-old son, Joseph Hall. Joseph Hall grew up in an environment where violence was the norm. His father was a deeply unstable man whose life was centered on promoting hate and exerting total control through terror. According to testimony, Jeffrey Hall had physically abused Joseph and the other children for years, often threatening them with the same weapon that would eventually be used against him. On the morning of May 1, 2011, the cycle of violence ended. While Jeffrey Hall was asleep on the couch, Joseph took his father's .357 Magnum revolver, placed it against his father's head, and pulled the trigger. Jeffrey Hall died instantly. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. Joseph initially claimed an intruder had broken in, but the narrative quickly fell apart. He soon confessed to police that he had shot his father because he was tired of the abuse. The case became a national flashpoint, pitting the grim reality of severe child abuse against the strict laws of homicide. The defendant was a 10-year-old boy charged with murder. The defense argued for self-defense and the imperfect self-defense doctrine, asserting that Joseph believed he had to kill his father to save himself and his younger siblings from continuous imminent abuse. The prosecution acknowledged the abuse, but argued the act was premeditated murder. The evidence presented in court was chilling. Jeffrey Hall's home was a shrine to his hatred, filled with Nazi memorabilia and white supremacist literature. But the most damning evidence was the testimony of Joseph's siblings and family, which painted a picture of a household ruled by Jeffrey's terrifying, unpredictable rages. The judge had to grapple with the core question: could a 10-year-old be held fully responsible for an act committed under the duress of years of trauma? Ultimately, the juvenile court found Joseph Hall guilty of second-degree murder, concluding that the boy acted intentionally but not with the malice that would constitute first-degree murder. Given his age and the exceptional circumstances of severe abuse, the judge ruled that Joseph would be held in a juvenile facility until the age of 23. The tragic case of Joseph Hall is a profound, dark example of a child forced into a terrible choice. He killed his father not for money or a party or a cover-up, but to end a life of terror. The system recognized the unbearable weight of his trauma, acknowledging that his act was not one of malice, but one of desperate, tragic self-preservation. Joseph Hall's act was a desperate defense against his father. But the next case we examine involves two brothers who, for years, maintained a meticulously planned facade of grief and innocence after committing one of the most famous parricides in American history. What single detail about the victims' bodies finally forced the truth out of the two wealthy, privileged brothers? Comment and subscribe to find out as we dive into the chilling world of the Menendez brothers. Number 5. Lyle and Erik Menéndez, the Beverly Hills Blood Money. The date, 20 August 1989. The victims, Jose and Kitty Menendez. The crime, shooting their wealthy parents in their Beverly Hills home to inherit their multi-million-dollar estate. In 1989, the Menendez family represented the ultimate picture of the American dream achieved. Jose Menendez was a Cuban immigrant who had risen to become a powerful Hollywood executive. He and his wife Kitty lived with their two handsome, privileged sons, Lyle, 21, and Erik, 18, in a sprawling mansion in Beverly Hills. But the facade of perfection concealed an explosive, toxic truth. The brothers claimed they lived under a regime of relentless psychological and sexual abuse at the hands of their parents, particularly their father, Jose. The prosecution argued a simpler, colder motive: greed. The estate was valued at $14 million. The murders were meticulously planned down to the purchase of the shotguns and the staging of the crime scene. On the night of August 20, 1989, Jose and Kitty were sitting in the living room of their mansion, watching television. Lyle and Erik burst into the room carrying 12-gauge shotguns. The attack was frenzied and horrific. Jose was shot 5 times. Kitty was shot 10 times, including a final, disfiguring shot to the face. The brothers wanted to ensure no one survived and that the scene suggested a mafia-style execution. After the crime, Lyle and Erik drove to a nearby movie theater. This was their alibi, a poorly conceived attempt to place themselves away from the scene. They later returned home and, in a performance of Oscar-worthy terror, called the police, screaming that they had found their dead parents. For months, the brothers lived the high life, spending their future inheritance with reckless abandon. Lyle bought a Rolex watch, and Erik hired a full-time tennis coach. They bought expensive cars, went on lavish trips, and invested in a restaurant. This display of wealth and their strangely emotionless demeanor immediately raised red flags for investigators. The breakthrough came 8 months later, in 1990. Erik had confessed the crime to his therapist, Dr. L. Jerome Ozil. The therapist's mistress, hearing the tapes of the session, eventually reported the conversation to the police. This violation of patient confidentiality, while legally contested, gave the police the final piece of the puzzle. Lyle was arrested in March 1990, and Erik was arrested shortly after. The subsequent trials, which took place in the mid-1990s, became a massive national spectacle, one of the first true crime reality shows played out live on television. The first trial ended in a hung jury, with the jury split on whether the motive was self-defense against years of abuse, as the defense claimed, or pure greed, as the prosecution argued. The two narratives, the abuse victim versus the spoiled killer, were equally compelling and disturbing. In the second trial, the prosecution successfully reframed the murders as a premeditated assassination driven by the desire for the inheritance and freedom from their father's control. The key detail presented to the jury was the excessive, almost overkill level of violence, particularly the shot to Kitty's face, which suggested an intent to destroy evidence or display extreme malice. Lyle and Erik Menéndez were both convicted of first-degree murder in 1996 and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. They were separated for years, but in 2018 they were reunited in the same facility, a grim final chapter in their saga. The Menendez case remains a disturbing parable about the dark side of privilege and the horrifying complexity of familial abuse. Did they kill for money or to escape torment? The truth is likely a combination of both, a tragedy of wealth, dysfunction, and unforgivable violence. The Menendez brothers sought escape through money, but another wealthy, privileged young woman committed a similar act of betrayal for a completely different reason: the toxic influence of an older man. Next, we journey to Canada, where a 12-year-old girl and her adult boyfriend committed a shockingly brutal parricide, a crime that introduced a chilling, almost fictional level of callousness into the justice system. But what was the one detail the 12-year-old insisted on taking from the crime scene? Number 4. Jasmine Richardson, the preteen partner. The date, 23 April 2006. The victims, Mark and Deborah Richardson, and their 8-year-old son. The crime, a 12-year-old girl and her 23-year-old boyfriend murdered their family in Medicine Hat, Alberta, Canada. The case of Jasmine Richardson is unique in its chilling age dynamic and the scale of the crime. At just 12 years old, Jasmine had developed a relationship with Jeremy Steinke, a 23-year-old man who embraced a self-styled goth vampire persona. The relationship was dark, volatile, and predictably forbidden by her parents, Mark and Deborah Richardson. To Jasmine and Jeremy, the parents were the sole barrier to their twisted, romantic fantasy life. Driven by a shared sense of persecution and a belief that they were soulmates, they made a pact to eliminate the obstacles. Her entire family. The plot was a joint enterprise. On the night of April 23, 2006, Jeremy Steinke entered the Richardson family home in Medicine Hat, Alberta, Canada, armed with a knife. He first attacked Mark Richardson, stabbing him multiple times, killing him instantly. Deborah Richardson, Jasmine's mother, woke up to the noise and tried to call for help, but Steinke subdued her and stabbed her to death as well. Then came the most heartbreaking act of the entire crime. Steinke went into the bedroom of Jasmine's 8-year-old brother and murdered the child as he slept.
Jasmine was present, an accomplice to the murder of her parents and her younger sibling. After the murders, the two fugitives, the 12-year-old girl and her 23-year-old boyfriend, fled the scene. The crime scene was discovered the next day, and the sheer brutality shocked the quiet Canadian town. The manhunt led quickly to Jasmine and Jeremy Steinke. When apprehended, Jasmine seemed disturbingly calm. The investigation uncovered a horrifying trail of online communication, emails, and instant messages between Jasmine and Jeremy that detailed the plotting of the murders. They had explicitly discussed their shared fantasy of killing her family and running away together. At the trial, Jasmine was prosecuted under Canada's Youth Criminal Justice Act, which protects the identity of young offenders. She was found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. The jury found that she had planned the murders and aided her boyfriend, though the actual stabbings were done by Steinke. The final dark detail that revealed her callousness was that during the cleanup, Jasmine had insisted on taking her younger brother's SWAT team belt as a souvenir. It was a trophy from the crime she had helped orchestrate. Jeremy Steinke was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder in 2008 and sentenced to life in prison. Jasmine Richardson, due to her age, was given the maximum sentence for a youth offender, 10 years, a combination of custody and community supervision, with a review after 6 years. She was the youngest person in Canadian history to be convicted of multiple murders. The Jasmine Richardson case remains a chilling study of how fast and how deeply a child can be drawn into a world of darkness, driven by a toxic relationship and a cold-blooded desire to remove all obstacles to a shared, delusional fantasy. Jasmine Richardson's age made her sentence a point of national debate, but the next case we examine also involves an extremely young, unstable killer whose rampage began at home and escalated into a terrifying school shooting. What was the killer's chilling motive for attacking his peers the day after he killed his parents? We next examine the horrific story of Kip Kinkel. Number 3. Kipland, or Kip Kinkel, the twisted manifestation. The date, 20 to 21 May 1998. The victims, Bill and Faith Kinkel, plus 2 students at school. The crime, killed his parents at home, then committed a mass shooting at Thurston High School in Springfield, Oregon. Kipland Kip Kinkel was a deeply troubled 15-year-old living in Springfield, Oregon. He was obsessed with weapons, violence, and had a lengthy history of psychological issues and erratic behavior. His parents, Bill and Faith Kinkel, both teachers, were loving and highly concerned about his son, but struggled to find effective help for their son. In the days leading up to the murders, Kip's behavior had become dangerously unstable. On May 20, 1998, he was arrested for stealing a pistol from a friend's car. His father, Bill Kinkel, picked him up from the police station, a moment that sealed both their fates. Bill Kinkel was furious and disappointed. He told Kip they would discuss his punishment when his mother, Faith, returned home. That afternoon, Kip Kinkel went down to the kitchen, retrieved a .22 caliber rifle, and waited for his parents to return. His father, Bill Kinkel, was the first to return. He shot him once in the back of the head as he sat at the kitchen table. He then dragged his father's body into the bathroom and covered it with a sheet. When his mother, Faith, returned a few hours later, Kip met him in the garage. He shot her once in the back of the head, then shot her multiple times as she lay on the floor to ensure she was dead. He then dragged her body next to his father's and waited. He spent the rest of the night and the following morning alone in the house with the two bodies, occasionally listening to music and preparing for the next horrifying phase of his plan. The Parricide was merely the prologue to a greater act of violence he had been contemplating. He wanted to go out in a blaze of terror. On May 21, 1998, Kip drove his mother's car to Thurston High School. He arrived dressed in a trench coat, armed with 3 guns and over 1,100 rounds of ammunition. He opened fire in the school cafeteria, firing mercilessly into the crowd of students. He killed 2 students, Ben Walker and Michael Ryder, and injured 25 others before he was finally subdued by a group of unarmed students. During his interrogation, Kip Kinkel claimed he was hearing voices, a twisted manifestation of a deeply disturbed mind. When police searched the home, they discovered the bodies of his parents and a handwritten journal in which Kip had detailed his hatred, his psychological battles, and his plan to kill everyone I love and then kill as many strangers as possible. The motive was not logical, but psychological, a suicidal urge to destroy the world around him, starting with the 2 people who loved him most. Kip Kinkel pleaded guilty but mentally ill to 2 counts of murder for his parents and 2 counts of murder for the students. He was sentenced to 25 years and 3 months in prison without the possibility of parole. The Thurston High School shooting and the parricide that preceded it forever changed the way America viewed school violence. It was a terrifying glimpse into a troubled mind that chose to destroy the ultimate sanctuary, the home, before turning its rage outward onto the community. Kip Kinkel's descent into violence started at home, but another young man, just 2 years earlier, was also driven by rage and a profound sense of isolation to first kill his mother and then attack his school. This case involves a detail that is even more disturbing than the guns Kip carried, a manifesto recorded on tape justifying the murder. What did the other shooter say was the real reason he murdered his mother? We count down with the equally shocking case of Luke Woodham. Number 2. Luke Woodham, the Satanic Pact and the shooting. The date, 21 May 1998. The victims, Bill and Faith Kinkel, plus 2 students at school. The crime, killed his parents at home, then carried out the Pearl High School shooting in Pearl, Mississippi. Like Kip Kinkel, Luke Woodham was a deeply isolated and bullied teenager in a small American town, Pearl, Mississippi. At 16, Woodham was often the target of ridicule, and he struggled with anger and identity. He found refuge in a small, dangerous group he had formed, a self-styled satanic clique that embraced a dark, nihilistic ideology. Woodham felt the intense psychological pressure building against him, and he blamed one person for his misery: his mother, Mary Ann Woodham. He felt she stifled him, controlled him, and prevented him from truly living the life he wanted. On the morning of October 1, 1997, Luke Woodham went into his mother's room while she was sleeping and stabbed her repeatedly with a hunting knife until she was dead. The parricide was cold and calculating, but like Kinkel, the murder of his mother was merely the beginning of a greater act. He had a manifesto, a chilling recording he made justifying his actions, claiming that he and his friends were agents of a greater, darker force. After killing his mother, Woodham drove her to Pearl High School. He was armed with a .30-30 lever-action rifle. He shot and wounded his ex-girlfriend, then opened fire on the crowded campus. He killed 2 students, Lydia K. Dew and Christina Menefee, and wounded 7 others before he was finally subdued by the assistant principal, Joel Myrick, who retrieved a personal firearm from his truck. The investigation quickly moved to the Woodham home, where police discovered Mary Ann Woodham's body. They also found Woodham's chilling, pre-recorded confession tape. On the tape, Woodham explicitly addressed the murder of his mother, stating, quote, "I killed my mother because I love her. I know that sounds strange, but I can't stand to see her suffer on earth." End quote. This was a bizarre, twisted justification rooted in a self-pitying, delusional worldview. The investigation uncovered the involvement of Woodham's satanic friends, who were charged as accessories to the crime, having been aware of Woodham's plans and having helped him acquire weapons. In 1998, Luke Woodham was tried as an adult. His defense argued the influence of the satanic group and mental illness, but the prosecution successfully painted him as a clear-eyed killer driven by rage and a desire for notoriety. Woodham convicted of 2 counts of murder, 1 count of manslaughter for his mother, which was negotiated down, and multiple counts of assault. He was sentenced to 3 life sentences plus 140 years. The Luke Woodham case, along with the subsequent Kinkel and Columbine cases, forced the American public to confront the terrifying reality of deeply troubled young men acting out their private violence in the public sphere, a rampage that always began
with the fundamental betrayal of the family unit. The violence of Luke Woodham was rooted in a profound psychological break. But our final case, the deepest descent into the unthinkable, involves a crime committed by a privileged young man whose motive was simpler, yet perhaps the most difficult to understand: sheer, unprovoked anger at a simple denial. This is the crime that shook a state to its core in the 1950s, a murder that involved the entire family and was ultimately judged by Truman Capote. Like this video and subscribe as we unravel the cold final betrayal of Lowell Lee Andrews. Number 1. Lowell Lee Andrews, the Quiet Killer of Wolcott. The date, 28 November 1958. The victims, William, Opal, and Jenny Andrews, father, mother, and sister. The crime, shot and killed his entire family over Thanksgiving weekend because he was told he couldn't return to college. The final entry on our countdown is arguably one of the most chilling and consequential cases of parricide in American history, not just for the crime itself, but for the stark, chilling psychopathy of the perpetrator and the literary legacy it left behind. Lowell Lee Andrews was an 18-year-old pre-med sophomore attending the University of Kansas. He was quiet, brilliant, and deeply repressed. He lived a life of intense intellectualism, but felt no real connection to the world or to his family, his father, William, his mother, Opal, and his 20-year-old sister, Jenny. The ultimate trigger was a simple yet final parental control: money. Lowell wanted to return to college, but his father, a successful local sheriff, was insisting that Lowell cut down on his spending. The conversation escalated into a confrontation. Lowell, seeing his comfortable life and future plans threatened by his father's frugality and authority, made a silent, terrifying decision. On Friday, November 28, 1958, the day after Thanksgiving,
Lowell executed his plan. He waited until his family was sitting in the living room, relaxing and watching television after a meal. He retrieved a .22 caliber rifle and a .410 shotgun, which he had meticulously cleaned and loaded. He walked into the living room and began firing. He first shot his sister, Jenny, and then his mother, Opal. Both died quickly. He then fired the shotgun at his father, William, who tried to rise from the couch but was hit and fell. Lowell methodically walked over and finished the job, firing the .22 caliber rifle into his father's head. He then completely staged the scene to look like a robbery gone wrong. He opened a window, scattered cash on the floor, took a television, and then drove off, throwing the weapons into the Kansas River. He drove to Lawrence, bought a soda, and went to a movie. When he returned home, he placed the call that would define the rest of his short life. Lowell was initially calm and cooperated fully with the police, maintaining his composure under questioning. But his story was too clean, too emotionless. The most damning piece of evidence was his profound lack of grief, a detached, almost scientific demeanor that alarmed the seasoned investigators. Under intense questioning, Lowell Lee Andrews broke and confessed, revealing the chilling truth: there was no robbery. He had simply grown tired of his family and wanted them out of his life so he could do as he pleased. The motive was simple: self-centered patricide. The case became a sensation in the Midwest, but its notoriety became global when the celebrated writer Truman Capote arrived to cover the trial. Andrews was one of the two main characters Capote interviewed extensively for his groundbreaking true crime novel, In Cold Blood. The book captured the raw, chilling indifference of Andrews, who famously told a psychiatrist, quote, "I feel nothing for them." Andrews was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death. He was hanged on November 30th, 1962, just 4 years after his monstrous crime. The final terrifying lesson of Lowell Lee Andrews is that sometimes the greatest betrayals are not driven by extreme abuse or financial necessity, but by a quiet, profound lack of empathy, a calm, intellectual decision to destroy the very roots of one's existence simply because they became an inconvenience. The Quiet Killer of Wolcott demonstrated that the most dangerous monsters are often the ones who hide in plain sight. These 10 cases are more than just true crime. They are a deep, disturbing study of the breaking point, the moment when the sacred bond of family dissolves into the primal urge for freedom, rage, or money. We've seen the wealthy killer driven by inheritance, the traumatized child fighting back, and the sociopath erasing his past. The common thread is a profound failure of the family system, a terrifying reminder that the greatest danger can often be found not on the street, but in the chair right next to you at the dinner table.
Thank you for watching. If these deep dives into the psychology of crime challenge and inform you, please remember to subscribe and share this video with a friend. Let us know in the comments below which of these unthinkable acts left you the most unsettled.